Hello, everyone. I am Héctor Zavala, the Associate Director of the office in Boston of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. On behalf of our director, Dr. Javier Laguna, I would like to welcome you all to this new edition of our series of conversations in the humanities. The webinar of today is entitled Digital Horizons, Exploring Frontiers of the Humanities in the Digital Era. As usual, our colleague Mariana Imaz is going to be the chair of this session and will be introducing our guest lecturers. So please enjoy this webinar that is going to be very interesting and have a very nice day.
So good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from, and welcome to this series of conversations about particular topics in the humanities that we're developing at UNAM Boston. So today we'll be talking with three scholars about an incredibly interesting sort of new approach to the humanities, and that is the digital humanities. So we'll be talking about what they are, what sort of things they allow us to understand or recognize, and more traditional approaches do not. So we'll be talking about that today. So we're joined today by Catherine Clark, Miriam Peña, and Alicia Rodríguez. And before we begin, let me just tell you a little bit more about our invited speakers of today. So Catherine Clark is an associate professor of history and French studies at MIT, and she's also the director of the Digital Humanities program at the same institution. Her research is largely concerned with how the visual produces knowledge in the past and contemporary historical practices, and with the implement of the digital and computational image analysis. Catherine is the author of Paris and the Cliché of History, published by Oxford University Press, a history of Paris photographic history that not only sheds light on the new history of the French capital, but also offers methodologies useful to all historians for using photographs as primary sources. So Catherine, thank you so much for joining us. Miriam Peña is an associate researcher at the Instituto de Investigaciones Bibliográficas at UNAM. She's a specialist in digital humanities and literary studies, with particular interest in the development of models for enriched publishing and in digital scholarship. She leads projects such as Libros de Todos, Books for All, making visible the heritage collection of the National Library of Mexico. She is also in charge of the project Mexican Bibliography and Applied Digital Humanities, where she develops protocols for digital preservation. Miriam, thank you so much for joining us. Alicia Rodríguez is an assistant professor at Modern Languages, Literature, and Culture Department at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And as a digital humanities scholar, she writes and teaches using digital mapping, text mining, and database building practices. She worked as a digital scholar assistant at the Emory Center for Digital Scholarship, and she took part in the data sourcing and management of the Open World Atlantis project. During her time as a digital ethnic feature consortium mentor, she was involved in the curriculum design of an AAPI history digital methodology course. Alicia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Mariana.
So let me start this conversation trying to sort of define what this field is, what the digital humanities is. So for some, the digital might be on sort of one spectrum and the humanities might be on a complete different spectrum. So how is it that you define this sort of new approach to the humanities and the dialogue that these two fields have with each other? So Alicia, let me start with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mariana. First of all, I want to thank you for organizing this conversation and making it happen. And I also want to say a special thank you to Héctor Zavala, my colleague at UMass Boston. So there are many different definitions of digital humanities. And I think that for me, it really is about the approach. It's about the angle that is used to center the humanities, but also deliver it in a digital way. For me, it's really about three different things. Creativity, it's making a vision come true. It's being able to share a vision of a specific historical event, of a text, of an analysis of network, So one, creativity. The second one is intentionality. How do you harvest data is really important. There's a lot of ethical questions that we have to ask ourselves as we build digital projects in ways that we didn't necessarily in traditional projects. So how do you harvest the data? How do you use it? Who has access to it? Who do you do this for? Like, these are questions that really are the center of my reflection. And then the last two components, which are a bit similar, is sustainability and accessibility. So when I mean sustainability is I try with my intentional and creative approach to be able to render projects sustainable. So you have to think about the scope, and then you have to think of accessibility, because if not everyone has access to it, then what is the point of doing it, kind of. But that's what I want to say right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Catherine, please go ahead.
Alicia, do you want to go, or do you want me to take a stab? I'm happy
go
to
ahead.
start. So we at MIT, the way we think about the digital humanities is simply the application of digital or computational methods to humanistic questions. So it's really interesting, Alicia, what you said about digital access. That is not something that we have thought of as integral to the types of digital humanities questions we ask, but it may be turning text into a data set, right? Encoding text, so you have text in ones and zeros, and then computers can work on it. Maybe doing the same for images or for data sets of people, which, as you mentioned, do have really important kind of ethical implications. What does it mean to reduce human populations to ones and zeros, right? And so for us, the digital humanities is the melding of these methods that our students are very highly trained in with the types of questions that are not easily answered in ones and zeros answers. They're not black and white questions, right? So what is the meaning of text? What is the meaning of culture? How does culture produce meaning in the world? How do humans make decisions? How do they interact with their environments? So we're trying to bring together two fields that are quite different in the types of questions that they ask, and ask them to find common ground, right? Where can the computer help us answer the types of non-binary questions that humanists like to ask? And my hope for the digital humanities, we're all talking to each other through laptops right now, right? We're all using computers. So there are certain kind of digital practices and digital tools that we've accepted are part of all disciplines. And I would like to see in the digital humanities that in the future, we have just a range of tools. So some people might be encoding text, some people might not be, some people might be using computational or algorithmic or digital methods. Not everyone might be, but that it would be as simple as deciding whether or not you write longhand or you write on the computer. And that we would have a kind of basic fluency in these types of methods to answer the questions we're interested in.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Miriam, please go ahead.
Well, I think maybe I just can add that the humanities have been using the technologies available every time. Like when we first start writing, who wrote? The historians, the poets. So it's not new that we are using technologies and techniques to bring and to portray the human knowledge and the human creation. So now we are in the digital age. So it's only natural that we went along these new methodologies, technologies, and specifically techniques, because we are implementing that not only to study ourselves and our production, but to also understanding these other kinds of creations. Like I don't know, because I am not a web developer or a programmer, if there is a reasoning behind what am I doing an algorithm? Why am I creating a database? So I think that humanities, and especially the digital humanities, not only create projects, text mining, databases, we all do that. I mean, most of us in our projects, but also go beyond the questioning of why are we doing this? Why are we creating a data set? Because it's easier to read a novel than to analyze 400 plays from the 1600s. But it's like what with these transformations, we are adapting. And also, I think that these adaptations and these implementations of technologies and techniques are allowing us to see in a different perspective what is the human production, the cultural production, but also analyze us ourselves as the subjects, like as if we were the subject of the study at the same time that we are studying the subject. So it's a very meta. And I think that's what is very interesting. I love that we don't have a unique definition of the humanities. That it goes, as Alicia said, it goes with the practice, and every practice is different, and every angle and every perspective enriches this discipline of this field of study, or depends what you want to call it.
Thank you so much, Miriam. So let me sort of stay with the question of incorporating the digital approach to the humanities. And I want to ask you in particular how you do that in your own research, and how do you, what type of digital things you're using in your own research, and especially if you can sort of tell us what is it that the digital is allowing us to illuminate in your particular research. So Catherine, let's start with you now, if it's okay.
Yeah, of course. So I'm a scholar of photography, as you mentioned in the introduction. And for a long time, have been a real skeptic of the digital humanities, because I think that I have a better ability to analyze a photo than the computer does, right? And I think most people would agree with me. One photo, I'm way better than the computer. 50 photos, I still think I'm better than the computer. But when I was doing the research for my first book, I stumbled upon a collection of 100,000 photos. And these were photos taken in Paris in 1970. They were part of an amateur photo contest. Month of May, 1970, 15,000 photographers were unleashed on the city. The city was divided up into squares. They produced an archive of 100,000 images. Well, let me tell you, I am not better than the computer at looking at 100,000 images. So I have been working on this project for almost 2 decades now. And at first, I just sampled photos myself. I looked at 11,000 photographs over the course of several years. And then when I arrived at faculty at MIT, everyone said, oh, we can get computers to do this. And I was like, no, they're not as good as me. But in the last several years, I've built a database of these photos. I've built a web interface, and I've had students working with me to build and technically competent colleagues. I'm going to give Ryan Ahmed a shout out, to build machine learning and computer vision models that look at the photos for us. So you can identify objects in these photos and find all the objects that have cars in them. You can identify all the photos that have cars in them. You can identify all the photos that have bottles in them. So then you find bottles of wine on cafe tables or in shop windows. And then the students also built an algorithm to find photos that look similar. So one of the things I do as a scholar is not just what the content of the photo is, but how is it put together? And the computer can look and find similarly put together images. So this website, which is live, and I'll give you the link for it, and we can put it in the notes for this webinar, but it doesn't replace the work of the scholar, but it provides new pathways through a set of images that are otherwise very hard to access. So the website currently has 5,000 color slides on it. It will, by the end of the summer, have 30,000 color slides. And it be a kind of teaching and research tool, this snapshot view of Paris in 1970. So that has been the big thing that I have found machines have been able to do for me, is deal with the problem of quantity, which is the problem of the 20th and 21st century in the humanities, right? There's so much stuff. And I think that the computer, used smartly, right, can help us figure out how to do that.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That's fascinating. Miriam, do you want to go ahead, please?
Well, yes. I mean, the context is I work in the National Library. So part of the purpose of my institute is to make the heritage documentation available to the public. And some of it's already published online, like digitized and stuff like that. However, we have these massive amounts of information, a lot of books and a lot of archives and manuscripts. It's too much information that usually the general public is not aware of that. The researchers and the scholars also know, and they will go to the archives to do their research. But the nation, the rest of the users have no idea what we have there, and we have some amazing stuff. And maybe if we put it, the idea was we digitize everything and put it and upload it. And it's been done. It's cataloged and like, you know, like a library, like a catalog, an online catalog and everything. However, what I'm doing is like, I'm trying to make it more visible, not only by using the digitized versions of the archives, for example, of the manuscripts, but also doing a study on them, like timelines, networks of people, geolocalization, because I'm working with telegrams. So where did they came from, where they went from? And I'm working right now in a specific period of time that is the Mexican Revolution. One of the presidents, and I'm working with the telegrams and the letters that he received from many people, like from fans and admirers, or to political allies, the family and his wife. So it's a very interesting universe. And what I'm doing with the digital is creating the connections, the networks, and made it an easy to access publication, like a website, that the people can just go and look at it as we're like, okay, this is a history of life. It's gossip. It's, you know, it's all of this, like, and it's more interesting. And I believe that making this without sacrificing the academic approach, because it's very well curated, you can have more people access this heritage documentation and get interested in their own in their own history. And so that's you. And I mean that the publishing part is, well, it has to be an easy to access website, not only a database, not only a catalog, because that's already available from the library, but you know, some visuals, some maybe clips and stuff, like people, not only students and not only scholars, but just regular people that wants to know what happened in the Mexican Revolution. So that's pretty much what I'm using the digital for right now.
Thank you so much, Miriam. And Alicia, let me sort of try to pair this question of your own research also with, a more sort of general approach. And I mean, you were working and developing a curricula for digital humanities. So if you can tell us a little bit more about, how do you teach digital humanities and why is it important to teach it, and what does it sort of, illuminate for students in your particular case?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a scholar of Caribbean, French-speaking Caribbean literature and visual arts and culture. And essentially my methodology unites literary analysis and digital mapping. So I use the body of the text as a place to do text finding and to build a database based on where the characters go in the novel, where are they going to, for how long, so I basically analyze their itinerary and then create digital maps of the novels. And when I was doing my PhD at Emory, I challenged myself to actually teach it to students in an introduction to French literature. And it was also about Paris. It was called Paris in its Geography, a digital approach to literary analysis. And so I came with this methodology, and I was like, oh, I hope it works. And because that was kind of my first time. And it actually, not only did it work so well, but they actually developed, it's interesting when it's something that is so close to you and you think that you're the only person kind of doing it, but then seeing that you are actually able to teach it to students and that they actually appropriate themselves. They make it theirs, So I had a student who was very STEM oriented. She, for example, read a novel about the snapshots of a writer who was basically sketching impressions of people on the subway. And then she created like a contextualization of the neighborhoods, of their economics. She gave like a deep, almost sociological analysis of that. And I thought that was very interesting because it's not necessarily my approach, but her coming from a very analytical, very like STEM point of view, actually, she made it hers. And so that's why it's been really helpful. And through the DEF CON, the Digital Ethnic Futures Consortium, I've been able to work with 2 different professors, and now I'm actually at the head of my own faculty development unit. So yeah, and it's been very rewarding.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Alicia. Catherine, do you want to add anything to this teaching perspective of the digital?
Yeah, so because I teach at MIT, we can do this a little bit differently, right? And so when I have taught the digital humanities, it's taking, and I haven't personally taught this, but helped develop this course, it's called Encoding Culture, the course that we've been teaching at MIT. And it's taking students who know how to code and asking them to think about what does it mean to use those tools on cultural artifacts. So we teach a unit about text, we teach a unit about images, we teach a unit about sound, and we teach a unit about people, about human data sets. So what can you do when you turn things into ones and zeros? And what can you not do? What can you not answer? And the whole class is taught around this tension of, there are even people whose names cannot be encoded because they're not in ASCII, right? And the limits of what the computer can do, but also teaching students to get as much out of what the computer can do as possible. So really teaching students about the back end of the digital analysis of cultural artifacts, hoping that they can take that into, our MIT students are for the most part not becoming humanists, but they may go work for Facebook and they may be looking at marketing data sets, right? And really thinking the ability to think about those as data about real people, I think will benefit all of us throughout the world if the people doing that work are trained in what do you lose when you turn something into ones and zeros.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Miriam, do you want to add anything to the pedagogy?
Well, yeah, we have a couple of it's not seminars, the degree you have after the bachelor's, but it's not yet a master. This kind of in-between degree. And we are actually working, I work with a group of people that works at UNAM and other universities. We have a network built for that. And what we usually do is we take an extremely multidisciplinary approach. Like we have philosophers, historians, people from literature, from library science. And so this mix, we are all experts in some humanities, but also we use and apply humanities into our everyday work. So we teach a basic curriculum pretty much by example. Like, okay, this is a project about poetry. And this project uses these techniques, these methodologies, these tools. And then we analyze that. We like a dissection. We see how it's built, and then we question why it's built that way. And so far we want also very theoretical part. Like we are trying to include as much as possible the bibliography in Spanish, because most of the publications are in English so far. So we are trying to incorporate and produce a lot of as much bibliography as possible in other languages, Spanish, Portuguese, French. We have some good network of people working in other languages rather than English. And we also help each other by like providing these documents and these papers so we don't have to be monolingual. So it's very hands-on what we're doing and how we are teaching digital humanities here.
Thank you so much, Miriam. So let me sort of switch gears a little bit and ask you about the challenges that you have faced as digital humanities scholars, because sometimes we can think like, oh, maybe you had to learn coding, but maybe you didn't. Maybe that's a part of the job that someone that knows coding does. But I'm sure that there's some sort of challenges in sort of learning this new approach, because it is kind of new in the humanities that has been interesting for you. So Alicia, let's start with you again. So sort of the challenges that you have faced as a digital humanities scholar.
I would say that the biggest challenge, and I think that everyone will agree, is that it's basically kind of double the work. So it's, or 1.5 times the work, because we still are very much humanists and we still very much produce traditional scholarship. We just have to add the DH on, right? And so people don't really understand that sometimes it is a bit more work, but for me it is so it's intrinsically part of my thinking, so in a way I cannot really separate it anymore. It's not like I write all the paper And then I do the DH is actually as I am writing, as I am thinking, I think through the digital. This is how it's born. But again, it is a little more complicated than just like a Word doc. So I would say that. And something so that I had to learn, well, I had to learn like RJS and you know, to reference into databases are only fun for some time. But I also want to say that it is challenging for us, like a new generation of DH scholars, but I also really have to acknowledge the fact that a good part of the trail has actually already been blazed for us by a prior generation of DH scholars, and I really think it's important to acknowledge them. You know, I think, for example, I think about Rebecca Risson, the director of the DEF CON. I think about Kelly Baker-Josephs. I think about Kayama Glover. I think about Alex Hill, all of the founders of the Caribbean Digital Scholarship Collective. I think it's also important to recognize that. And sometimes the challenges lie more within academia, where some colleagues tend to have a bit of resistance. And sometimes it's a bit of a misunderstanding. For example, I'm a vegetarian. If you're not, that's okay. I am not really here to force you to abandon meat eating. You can eat your steak and I can eat my salad. And it doesn't mean do you know what I mean? It's like I'm not trying to like impose it on you. But sometimes there's a bit of resistance. So I would say those are kind of the challenges.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Miriam, please go ahead.
Well, the challenges that we've been facing so far is that we are the first generation of digital scholars here in Mexico. And we've been working with digital humanities for maybe 15 years, but so far we only have a couple of classes and these diplomats and stuff like that. So the first thing was, why? Why do we need this? I mean, the first class, I remember the official class that we have in the arts and humanities was from history, like digital history. And it was actually, we have a coordinator that was very open. She was very open to us. And then we switched coordinations and it was, the next one was, no, this is not history. We don't want that. You need to memorize dates and then you did. Okay, so they canceled the class. So the challenges we had at the beginning was this, like, we don't understand what's this. It's not philology, it's not linguistics, it's not geography, it's not history, it's fireworks, you know? So that was, but we are very, very persistent. So we kept going and we kept going. And finally, actually had to say that what happened with the 2020 lockdown was that people realized that the digital humanities have been present a lot. It's not something new. And now they need us. They need us to teach how to teach a class online without just reading a paper. You know, how to do research in different parts of the world without missing a beat. How to create. So it became apparent that we are not new in what we do. So we have more recognition, and now we are on trend. So now it's good. More people are joining, and more people are doing the, and also discovering that what they've been doing so far, it's digital humanities. Maybe they didn't identify it like that, but they are doing digital humanities. So now that is okay. Yes, my data set from pictures or from text, it is part of the digital humanities universe. So that's been good. It's been hard. It took us about 10 years maybe, but so far so good, and we are just going forward. So good.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Catherine, please, some of the challenges.
So I think the institutional challenges are real, and like when digital scholarship counts towards your research profile or not. And I think we could probably have a long, in-depth offline conversation about that question. But I want to mention some other challenges that I've encountered. One is funding. It costs more to maintain something and keep it online than it does to, once you've put a book into the world, it exists in a different way. So definitely raising funding has been something that I've found challenging. The other thing that I needed to learn to do, so I have not been using off-the-shelf tools, but really working with teams who can code. And so for me, it's been about learning. I learned to code as an undergraduate, but that was a long time ago, right? And I didn't learn to code in Python, which is what my students are using. I was learning to talk to people and understand the technical work enough to be managing it, learning to manage a team, learning to project manage. It's really been for me about learning to work collaboratively when I've been a very independent scholar, right? I go into the archives, I do my work, I sit at my desk, I write my Word documents. And once you're in the digital sphere, I think there are many more opportunities to work with partners and with other people and with research assistants, and trying to navigate how to do that has been something where I've learned a tremendous amount, and has definitely been like a growth experience, right? I've had to figure out how to do it. And I think that is something, and I loved how my colleagues mentioned these collaborative spheres, right? Working with each other. And I think that the digital humanities is really dependent on that. It's dependent on the exchange of information. It's dependent, we don't just map networks in the past, but we're creating networks in the present. And I think that is a really important part of this field that we're right to kind of acknowledge in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And, on that note, thinking through like the impact of the digital humanities in other areas, right? In areas such as social sciences or even STEM. So actually to prepare for this seminar, I was looking for digital humanities books, like people that have, published, and sort of try to get an idea of what that looks like. And I came across this book from Shahzad Basir. He just published at MIT Press, actually, A History of Islam. And it was so interesting because it's not a chronology, right? So he really sort of challenges the linear idea of time. And the book is more of a constellation, right? So you kind of click on different things and you get different times, different moments. And it was just so enriching and so amazing, right? And that couldn't be done in a printed version. And so I was just thinking through, well, this of course has implications for how we think about time, how we think about telling a story, right? How we think about our own research, and how does that translate to other disciplines as well? So if you can sort of share that with us, that'd be amazing. So Miriam, we'll start with you now.
Well, as I said before, digital humanities is multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary. So if you find a methodology that works for the social sciences and you can use it, you bring it back. And the same thing, if you develop some methodology, some technique, or maybe some program, and it can be used for political science, go for it. Like the sharing culture of digital humanities, like, look, I've done this. It's just if you want to use it. I have this data set based on economic history, but maybe it can be interpreted for anthropology or for cultural history. So the open science movement has also been part of the digital humanities, maybe low key, because it's still, some ethical aspects to consider, but the sharing of not only the methodologies and the data sets, but also the way we do things in the literature critical studies field could be used for cultural studies. So I think that it's impossible to do digital humanities if you are not thinking in multidiscipline, if you are not thinking in sharing, exchanging, and reusing, like the recycling of projects and of ideas and everything that you've been created. That's why I think not sure how much we can offer to the STEM part, because at least we are not programmers. I'm not a programmer, but I think that's what we have to offer, not only to the social sciences, but to the sciences and the hard sciences, is the critical thinking. Like, we really need to question why we are doing this and how we are doing it this way. If this is the best way, this is the only way. So I think that and that's come from the very, very hardcore humanities, like the critical thinking every time, all the time.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Catherine, please go ahead.
Alicia, do you want to go?
Oh, do you want to go, Alicia? Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh no, I was just really agreeing with Miriam. It's the tough act to follow. Because I think that, I mean, I'm really covered a good amount of ground. But yes, I do think that there has been in the age a good amount of effort to promote open access resources, and a practice of like really sharing. And I think that because you have a foot in so many disciplines, you, by definition, as a DH scholar, tend to be a bit more open to other disciplines' methodology. You don't discard them just because they're from another field. You think like, oh, I work halfway between cartography, human geography, ethnography, and Francophone literature, right? So why could I not learn something about the social sciences? So I think that it's really been that, and the critical thinking, like Mariana was saying, is to for me, for example, like I think something in my research and in my teaching is the notion of hybridity. I think that between the digital and the humanity, like the humanities are at core, we question what it means to be human. We question what it means to be human in a variety of answers. May that be philosophy, may that be literature, may that be history. What does it mean to be a human at this point in time, or now, or yesterday, or tomorrow, right? And now we have the option to do that through the digital. And so it's important to understand that there is something between the digital and the human, and it's a hybridity. And as we've seen during the pandemic, the notion of hybridity and hybrid became very present in the conversation. So I think that's something that we can also bring to the table.
That's
Thank
great.
you so much.
We all know about hybrid events, right?
Yeah.
I think, there are real places where scholars in the digital humanities are thinking together with scholars in STEM. So I would just mention the MIT project, the Data and Feminism Lab, right? Where my colleagues are really thinking very hard about what does it mean to think about data as objective, right? And that data is not objective. But also in terms of things like image analysis, Lauren Tilton's work at University of Richmond, who's working on image analysis. A lot of the sciences right now are about image analysis, right? It's about looking at MRIs and trying to do diagnostic on them, looking at the images that come out of your, spectron microscopic, like fancy $400 million machine, right? And like analyzing these images, right? And so I think that there's real overlap there in scholars working in particular fields. But I also think the digital humanities can be a gateway drug for students in STEM, right? It can be a way to get students into humanities conversations. And I think that part of picking up on what my colleagues have just said here, that part of getting students to ask the fundamental questions of the humanities, right? Why do we do what we do? How do we do it? How do we think about being human? How do we think about what humans do in the world? Like, these are really important questions, and we want to make sure that our colleagues who are training students in STEM are also helping them think through these issues. And if we can get students in because they're really into STEM and they see digital humanities and like, oh, that's a humanities class I can take, then great, because we're going to help them understand the bigger questions that we grapple with in our disciplines.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And, maybe to sort of start closing up this conversation, I mean, I would love to just ask you so many more questions, but to start sort of closing this up, if there's students out there, if there's people out there that are listening to this that, are like, ooh, that sounds so interesting. How can I even start, approaching this? Besides, of course, taking classes, what sort of resources are out there, or would you recommend for students that are starting or that are interested in this, or even just the general public? So Alicia, let's start with you now.
Yeah. I have some notes, and the first thing that I wrote is sketch out your vision with words, pencils, and papers first, because I think it's very important. Like, I want to say that that's the humanities part. Like, you have to understand your intention first, right? That's once you're a bit more familiar with digital humanities. But a good place to start would be DH Commons, and I can send the links so you can put them in the notes if you want. Humanity Commons, is a place where people share syllabi, papers, resources, and then there are a variety of free tools that have been developed through the funding and generosity of universities. And I'm thinking of the Night Lab, for example. I'm thinking of Timeline.js. I'm thinking of StoryMap.js. These are free tools offered by Northwestern University. I'm also thinking of got a shout out to my home institution back in my PhD, which is the Emory Center for Digital Scholarship, who also has put some amazing tools out there. I'm thinking about Redux for text. I'm thinking about OpenTour. There's so many beautiful kind of tools, free tools developed by universities that have been put out there. And honestly, easy tutorials that you can watch online that hopefully makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll send you an email after this so you can just send me all of these
course.
links so we
I
can
will.
book, but yeah, after, whenever we air this, so people can have those tools. Thank you so much, Alicia. Catherine, please go ahead.
Yeah, so there are, as Alicia said, there's a lot of resources out there online. I'd be happy to send you some links, but I also think the thing I want to, and this is my particular MIT bent, is that if you are a student and you are interested in these questions, learn to code. It may, and there are MOOCs, there's edX, there's, you can learn to code with the MIT resources, but there are a lot of resources out there. If you learn something like Python, which is what a lot of coding is happening in right now, you may not end up coding as you do digital humanities work, but I think the ability to understand what the tools you are using are doing is very important. So if you're young and early in your career and you have the elastic brain of an 18-year-old, by all means, try to learn some of this stuff, because it really, even if you don't code, you can understand the teams that do, and you can understand the software and the programs that you are using in a way that I think makes you intellectually more able to engage in the fundamental questions of how the work that you do is functioning. So that's my big plug. Learn more, learn harder upfront.
Thank you, Catherine. Miriam, please.
Well, there is also some open online massive classes, this that are built from universities. They're easy to follow classes, are free, so you don't have to pay for that. You can dedicate 20 minutes a week to watch a video, maybe do some activities. I can share a couple of links with you. We in Spanish specifically, we have one of those aimed to the people that are students from Latin America and Spanish speaker countries. But the idea is, I agree a lot with Alicia. Just take a piece of paper, draw what you want to do, and then research what you need to get there. So you can use, then I use Night Lab a lot for my classes. So you see very, very useful tools, very easy to use. And it's basic understanding of Excel and spreadsheets.
Yeah.
So it's very most people know how to use spreadsheets. So and what I like about these easy to use tools like Bayan tools as well is you can see a result right away. So you don't get discouraged as well, now I have a network. I'm visualizing a network in 5 steps. So I think that's especially with our growing visual culture, if you can have a student produce something that it's visual, that it's right away, it makes it more interesting and more enticing to follow up to. So I can share the links with you for the classes online, but also some of the tools that are very easy to use and gives you a result, especially a visual result right away.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Well, I just want to sort of we have a couple of more minutes. So if there's any sort of final thoughts, ideas that are still there, I just wanted sort of to open the mic to anyone that wants to do, final thoughts on the digital humanities.
Well, I wanted to add one more thing.
Yes, of course.
And maybe I want to think that I'm not naive and too rosy, but I genuinely believe that digital, at least in my work and my experience, there was an intersection between digital and public humanities that I think is very rich. And I think that the intersection of digital and public humanities has the opportunity to bridge a little bit a gap between the public and academia in the way that we share knowledge, that we share histories. And that within this public humanities, digital humanities encounter, there is really the potential for communities to be engaged in and to share their stories in a way that empowers them, instead of just having one author, the rule of the one author monograph. I think it really, I want to believe, can lead to a more horizontal sharing of knowledge and learning.
Thank you, Alicia. That's super important. Yeah, Catherine, please.
No, I was just gonna say, I think that's so great. And one of the things that the digital can do is provide preservation opportunities that are outside of formal institutional patterns, right? And I think that that's really important. And if you think of the work of our colleagues working in digital humanities with Black communities in the south of the US, for example, a lot of what they've done is preserve community stories and make them accessible. And that is tremendously important, right? And so I absolutely just second what you say about some of it is making things accessible and making the histories of people out there in the world who are not humanities scholars accessible to them, right? And accessible in ways that can be collaborative and can be crowdsourced and can be really interactive with communities. And I think that is just tremendously important.
Thank you, Catherine. Miriam, final thoughts?
I agree with Alicia and with Catherine. Like, we have the possibility to create something for the public. Like, embrace your history, embrace your heritage, and maybe you don't even know it existed, but here we created this resource so you can make it yourself again. You can reacquaint it with what is yours and what and in an easy way and as accessible as possible, because we are also limited with technology and stuff. But as at least we are trying to preserve something, so maybe in the future someone can go back and see what we are trying to do and to preserve, to do something with that.
Thank you so much, Miriam. And well, thank you all for, again, taking the time to do this, for sharing your knowledge with us. I think this was a super fruitful seminar, and I really hope to see you all very soon in another one of these. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Miriam.
Yes, thanks for the invitation.